Hello, everyone. By the way, it does say hello, everyone, but I can't get my fat arse into the shot, but so fuck it. That is what it is, right? I'm getting older, right? I'm not as skinny as I used to be. This week, I am going to be looking at Kit. Yes, that's right. Kit is back. Unfortunately, no, it's not the car, but it's the shitty plugin developer. Hey! Don't give a shit. I've already covered Kit before. I covered their Neve EQ emulation, which was an absolute shambles upon release. It only worked on Pro Tools and it was buggy as shit. And it took them like 3.5 months or however long it was to fix it. And then they released a digital EQ with an analog style workflow. Essentially, it was a linear digital EQ with just fucking a few analog knobs. It was pointless. It was just a linear EQ and it had more noise than any other EQ plugin that I've seen. So, well, that was a fucking waste. And they have decided to come back strong. And this time emulating, would you believe it, another Blackbird rare fucking EQ. I don't know why Blackbird keep on allowing them to emulate their EQs. However, right, it's their decision. Now, thankfully, I have something to compare it to, as UAD have released the Hitsville EQ, which is also emulating the Motown EQ. So you've got the Kit MoQ, which is a Motown EQ, and you've got the Hitsville EQ from UAD. Both of them are Motown EQs. From the research I've done, it was something, I don't know, it was like 44 or 46, 47 of these EQs were made. So it is a very, 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 very rare EQ to get your hands on. So there really shouldn't be many differences, you would imagine. Maybe slight tolerances. You know I wouldn't have made this video unless I had something to say, especially as Kit's back. Yay! But however, before we go into the geeky stuff, I am not in the right attire, right? The hello everyone, no, it's not right. Wait, give us a second. And I'm back with a danger warning, okay? I do have a danger warning for this video. Hold on, wait a minute. I'm in my boxers right now, but you're not going to see that. But I was going to say, that's for the Patreon fans. The fuck want to see that? I don't know, I might set up an OnlyFans for you and get Paul Third after dark, whatever, right? Audio bullshit detected. The fuck is that? I don't know what that was. Either way, my audio bullshit radar is going off and I have my audio bullshit detected jumper on. So whenever you see this on the channel, as soon as you see the danger, you know you're about to get hit with some audio bullshit from some plugin manufacturer, right? Let's just get straight into it because this is probably one of the best videos that I've done so far. A lot of work went into it and I'm going to enjoy this a little bit. Let's get into it. So first off, if you compare the pass-through of Kit to the UAD, you can see quite a difference, especially in the low end, due to the UAD's very low roll-off, which as you can see by a null on a kick sample, it does result in audible low-end differences. Now, this is UAD and Kit boosting 5 dB at 50 Hz. And yes, I did check in Doctor first to ensure that the MoQ was boosting correctly for the null. But it doesn't really make that much difference due to the UAD's high-pass filter as it alters the phase so much. But either way, you can see that in the 50 to 60 Hz region, we are getting as much as a -62, -63 dB difference, which is unfortunate as it's really just as simple as adding and adapting a 10 Hz high pass filter, as by doing that you cancel that low end difference out from any real audible aspect. But why is there no low end roll off in the Kit emulation? Suppose we can put that down to analog tolerances, eh? But either way, can you really hear those differences in the low end caused by Kit's emulation not having a high pass filter? Right, let's do a double blind test just to see. So that's one difference off the bat in regards to UAD and Kit's Motown emulations. And unfortunately for Kit, this is only going to get worse from this moment on, because something else that doesn't match up in the Kit and UAD emulations is the curve interaction, or lack of curve interaction for a better word. Now, many will get confused by this statement, as in solo, the bands will match up pretty well, as both have modelled the Motown EQ's proportional Q, which narrows the more the band is boosted, similar to that of an API, but still different. Now, UAD have given you this in fixed dB increments, which is correct to the hardware, while Kit have coded a constant proportional Q to give users more variability. However, whilst Kit were busy coding a constant proportional Q, UAD were modelling what may be one of the most important factors of the Motown EQs. You see, I stumbled upon a UAD representative who was involved in modelling the plugin, and he talked about how the Motown EQs had a purposely built circuit interaction between the EQ bands which created what they call interdependencies, which would result in clean separation of each band so the engineer had more control over the final EQ curve. So why does the Kit emulation not have this iconic interdependence circuit that the Motown EQ is apparently famed for? And unfortunately for Kit, it doesn't get any better in regards to correctly modelled behaviour, as if we have a look at the phase at 48 kHz, we can see that UAD does a pretty damn good job at keeping the phase linear up to 20k, considering it has a steep low-pass filter just after 21 kHz. Now, as you can see in the pass-through of UAD, it looks pretty straightforward, a low-end phase shift caused by the high-pass filter, and it's pretty much linear all the way to Nyquist, where with Kit, its default ×4 oversampling phase starts to roll off as low as 500 Hz, which strangely is improved at ×2 oversampling. I don't get that one. But ultimately is most improved at ×8 oversampling, which has the least high-end phase roll-off, but still starts to roll off as low as 5 kHz, which is still really bad. Now, if you understand sample rates, you'll note that if the roll-off in phase at 48k starts around 5k, then double the sample rate at 96k will shift that roll-off ×2 to around 10 kHz, and then 20 kHz at 192k, and you guessed it, around 40 kHz at 384 kHz. And if I was being really anal about it, due to the coding of the filters, the Kit MoQ needs to be really utilised at a sample rate of 384 kHz in order to get the most realistic phase result to the hardware. But I do think realistically, you could probably get away with 192 kHz at ×8 oversampling, but, now a big but. This hits my i7 laptop CPU as hard as 25 to 40 odd percent for one instance, which is stupid, completely unrealistic, and impractical. Now, many of you will be screaming at me,
"But you don't have the proportional Q in your digital EQs!"
And that is true. However, as I am such a pedantic little bugger, always trying to prove a point, what I can do is match each dB increment with its relative Q in Kirchhoff, and utilise the band list so I can get the modelled Q, but in dB increments like the hardware. I saved these as presets for each band and simply copied the settings to match these Kit settings, which I've intentionally cranked. Now, obviously, this is a bit of a pain in the arse, but as I said, this is purely just to prove a point that Kit's analog plugin is actually just a digital linear EQ. Because as you can see via the pink noise null at 48 kHz, all the bands cancel out from an audible aspect. Now, don't be distracted by that high-end difference, as this is purely just a difference caused by the skewed high-end phase due to Kit's poorly coded low-pass filter. But either way, for anybody trying to flip the tables on me and say that the difference in phase would be lost on a real-life source, here is a null on a mix with about 60 BFS of headroom. As you can see, the high-end difference has been reduced, but still some pretty audible difference after 8 to 10k. And just to prove that the main difference between the Kit MoQ and a linear digital EQ is indeed just the phase, Here is the same settings as before, but at 192 kHz and also with 130 Hz fully cranked and 12.5k included this time with a big 7 dB boost. And as you can see, the high-end difference has drastically reduced, and it's also fair to say that those differences found on this pink noise null would mostly not be audible on most sources or even a full mix. It would have been nice to see if they fully cancelled out on a 384 kHz session, but unfortunately my version of Pro Tools only allows up to 192 kHz. But, as I will show you here, by changing span to show 96 kHz, it's pretty obvious that where the delta signal starts to creep in at minus 80 dBFS, which looks around 12 to 13 kHz, it would be shifted up at 384 kHz and would be more around the 24 to 26 kHz region, which would remove any audible high-end difference between 20 and 20 kHz.
But how could this be when there are non-linear processes in vintage analog gear? Surely the Motown EQ would have some transformer-based harmonics?
And yes, that would appear to be the case, as UAD have stated that the Motown EQ utilised UTC and freed input and output transformers as well as socketed op-amps. And by looking at the UAD Hitsville, it does indeed show low-order harmonics indicative to what you'd expect from gear that uses input and output transformers. And they've even modelled the non-linearities of pushing those input transformers harder, as you can see. The harmonics increase in line with the increase of input level. And not only that, they have also modelled the non-linearities of each band, which as you can see do affect the THD, and also something else that we'll get into shortly. Because I now obviously need to compare the kit Mo-Q, which, surprise surprise, is completely linear. There are no harmonics to be had in this plugin, and regardless of how hard you go into it, you will not create any non-linearities whatsoever, which is odd considering that they state that they
meticulously studied and modelled this iconic unit to build the most accurate analog model EQ plugin ever. Why?
Now, I have already thought ahead for what excuse Kit is going to come up with, as what I do need to tell you is that as much as the harmonics are there and can be brought up further, it's still extremely subtle. Actually, comparing UAD at minus 18 dBFS compared to minus 6 dBFS, the low-end harmonic difference, whilst there, is still inaudible. As you can see, plus 12 dB of input gain gives you a difference that is under minus 100 dBFS, which is nowhere near audible. And this was probably where Kit thought they would be able to sneak away from the whole non-linearity thing, as what's the point of incorporating something that doesn't really give any audible results? Well, what they failed to recognise is that lots of hardware gear can incorporate analog clipping, which is another form of non-linearity, and we all know that distortion from clipping analog gear is audible. And this is something that UAD didn't miss either, as they had already incorporated amp modelling into the plugin. That's why we've already seen non-clip non-linearities and non-linear transformer rise. However, to get the UAD to clip, you really do have to hit this thing hard. And even at minus 6 dBFS, the clipping only really kicks in when I start to use the EQ. So the more EQ I boost, the more clipping I get, which is still pretty cool. However, as I said, it is very dependent on your input gain, as even minus 12 dBFS won't start clipping till you hit it to around minus 8 dBFS, so to clip you do have to be going in quite hard. And just to show you why it's quite a nice effect to utilise in the UAD, here is the same kick drum we heard earlier with no clipping, moderate clipping and more aggressive clipping. Now, as I'm going to show you, the kit doesn't have any non-linearities whatsoever. I've simply replaced the UAD instances for kit instances, and as you can see, we get full nulls regardless of input setting. I'm talking completely off the meter nulls. Nada, nothing. And there you have it. In this moment, I could make many claims in regards to the accuracy of Kit's analogue modelling, but I won't, as, to be fair, I don't have access to the Blackbird Motown EQ. However, all that aside, what I can tell you is that the Kit Blackbird MoQ is indeed just a poorly coded linear digital EQ with a coded constant proportional Q. When at its highest sample rate, it can be easily curve matched with no audible differences by any digital coded EQ, as its curve interaction is purely digital. We've proved that. And in comparison, the UAD Hitsville is a plugin that incorporates clipped and non-clipped non-linearities as well as harmonic rise in conjunction with the EQ bands, which do have more separation and less band interaction than a digital EQ. See you next week.